Hello, and welcome to Irrigating for Food and Fish, the latest webinar in the Water and Working Lands webinar series from Western Landowners Alliance. I'm Lewis Wirtz, the Communications Director and your ad hoc host for today. I am really excited to get to do this. We've got a lot of people registered today, which is really exciting. So it's going to take a little while for people to get in. So we're just going to give it a minute, and then we'll get started once the attendees has stopped ticking up quite so rapidly. Thank you. All right. Welcome again. Good afternoon. I'm Lewis Wirtz, the Communications Director for the Western Landowners Alliance, and I'd like to welcome you all to the fourth webinar in our series of Water and Working Lands webinars. The fourth one of 2025. We did a whole series in 2024. It's in 2023, and we're going to keep them going as long as people keep showing up. So thank you very much for coming. We are recording this webinar, so if you have colleagues or friends or neighbors who weren't able to make it, we'll send it out to everyone who registered. You're welcome to forward that on to people if they missed it. We'd love it if you did that. So just be aware, and if you have to leave early or miss some part, you will be able to come back and catch up. And if you weren't able to join us last month, or if you'd like to rewatch the program, you can find a link to the March Neighboring Through Drought, Water Sharing Solutions and What They Might Mean for the West webinar here in the chat. I have a couple of colleagues who are joining me today, Matt Smith, Danny Howlett, and Hallie Mahold, who I'll introduce in more detail in just a little bit. They're on and we'll be dropping stuff in the chat, dropping stuff in the and monitoring the Q&A, helping us run things behind the scenes. So if you have questions, are having trouble hearing anyone, anything like that, please don't hesitate to use those functions. Somebody is paying attention. Yeah, now I will introduce our staff. Danny, I don't know if you want to pop on and wave and say hi. She's behind our logo there. There's Danny Howlett. She's our outreach and membership coordinator. Good to know her face and her name, because if you're a member of WLA, which you are now as you joined by joining this webinar today, she's the person who wants to hear from you, and can help with whatever membership is all about. We're also joined by Matt Smith, who is the manager of the Headwaters of the Colorado Initiative. Hi, Matt. Critical water program of WLA. So thanks for joining us. And then Hallie Mahold is our Chief Programs Officer, and Hallie's in Salida, Colorado. And I'm going to pass it over to Hallie, who will provide just a brief introduction to WLA in case this is your first time encountering us.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Lewis. As Lewis said, I'm Hallie Mahold. I'm our Chief Programs Officer. So Western Landowners Alliance is a landowner-led, nonpartisan organization advancing policies and practices to sustain working lands, connected landscapes, and native species across the American West. In a nutshell, we're a network of landowners and managers and partners dedicated really to keeping the working lands of the West whole and healthy, both for the benefit of people and wildlife. So our work is really guided by people with boots on the ground, who understand the importance of the practical realities of agricultural production, land and water management, and natural resource conservation. And we focus our work on empowering landowners and managers with resources, with knowledge, with public policies to support that stewardship on the ground. So thanks so much for joining us today. Looking forward to the conversation, and back over to you, Lewis.
Thanks, Hallie. And I apologize, everyone. There is some construction happening outside of my house. So if there's background noise as I come on and off mute, I can't help it. I wish I could, but I can't. So yeah, and so today's webinar will feature two speakers. You can see them there, Jeff Crane and Merrill Beyeler, and I'll do formal introductions in just a second. We're going to have Jeff and Merrill answer a couple of questions we prepped for them and present on their expertise. and experience. And then we'll use the question and answer function in Zoom to run a question and answer. So we do really hope that you have questions for our speakers today. Please use that Q&A function. Matt Smith is going to be monitoring that. And then we can make sure we get those questions to the panelists. And if we don't get to all the questions, we'll do our best to get you answers and include them in the recap afterwards, because we know that an hour is not enough time to cover a topic as big as this. So we'd also love to know who you are and where you're located and what your affiliation is, or what's bringing you here today. So you can drop that in the chat. That'll help everyone, connect. And then you should be able to chat with people directly if somebody is in your region and you want to go get coffee afterwards. The goal of today's panel discussion is to explore the topic of irrigating for food and fish, water infrastructure, and healthy streams. We recognize that landscapes, communities, and water management decisions are incredibly diverse, complex across the West, and that no one program, policy, or practice can fix the pressing issues of our time. The purpose of these webinars is simply to share information and experiences and provide an opportunity for landowners and experts to exchange knowledge, and hopefully find ways to build out a more robust toolbox as we think through all of the ways that we can build a more resilient future for the West and us all. So now it's my pleasure to introduce today's speakers, Merrill Beyeler and Jeff Crane. Start with Merrill. Really excited to welcome Merrill Beyeler, a rancher from Leadore, Idaho. We were just talking before we got on, 14 miles west of the Continental Divide in the headwaters of the Lemhi in Idaho. He's long been a leader in natural resource stewardship. Merrill's contributions have been recognized at the local, state, and national levels. He currently serves as vice chair of the Idaho Rangeland Resource Commission, policy chair for Idaho Businesses for the Outdoors, a member of the steering committee for the Idaho Rangeland Conservation Partnership, and is involved with the University of Idaho's Rinker Rock Creek facility. Somehow he still has time to push cows down the road this morning. I don't know how. So thank you so much for joining us, Merrill, today. And Jeff Crane also joining us. Jeff is principal of Crane Associates and a longtime advocate for Colorado's rivers. Jeff's joining us, I think, from Hotchkiss, Colorado today. His career began by studying the unintended consequences of well-meaning but harmful practices like using bulldozers to control river systems. In 1996, he founded the North Fork River Improvement Association, the project on the North Fork of the Gunnison River in west central Colorado. That project became a model for many community-led efforts that followed. Over the past 25 years, through Crane Associates, Jeff has led dozens of river restoration projects and helped communities across Colorado organize, plan, and implement efforts to protect and enhance their river corridors. His work strikes a balance between restoring natural river function and supporting the social and economic needs of stakeholders. Thank you so much for joining us today, Jeff. So now I am excited to get our panel discussion started with a question for Jeff. So you've been involved in stream restoration and irrigation diversion work across the Gunnison Basin for a couple of decades. Plus, what are some of the biggest engineering, water rights, or hydrologic challenges you faced when trying to design systems that serve both agriculture and aquatic ecosystems? And how have you tackled them? That's a small question for you.
Well, the hydrologic problems, the engineering problems are relatively small. They're not, they're not unmountable in any case. Or really, I think that the biggest issues have been developing a foundation of trust between landowners and in the community and with government agencies. It's, back when we first started the North Fork River Improvement Association, or even before that, in our valley, the county got their first bulldozer in 1948, and they used it to plow the river. And they would just straighten out the river and run basically a storm sewer down the valley, and put up big big, walls of gravel on both sides of the river. And high water would come, the runoff would come, it would hit these dikes, and it would take them apart like it was made out of sugar. And 5 to 10 acres of prime agricultural land would be washed away in a matter of days, sometimes in a matter of hours. The landowners up and down the North Fork have been obviously completely frustrated by all this for many years, and trying to figure out what best to do. And we got together as a group and took basically the same bulldozer and put the meanders back into the river and revegetated the floodplain and stabilized outside banks and rebuilt the irrigation diversions in a manner that would not put so much shear stress onto these banks and so much velocity, and slow it down and run the water through the floodplain. And that did quite a few benefits just doing that. I mean, by watering the floodplain, you were basically filling your sponge up with water, because here in the West, as pretty much everybody knows, come August and September, there's not a whole lot of water. And to have a well-vegetated floodplain that holds water and then releases it slowly back into the river system is sometimes all the water that irrigators have to work with come late season. So I think that the biggest issues that I've come across is really building trust and educating landowners on methods that will help provide a full decree of water for their ditches for agriculture.
Thanks, Jeff. It is great to hear about the experience of reconnecting floodplains, and also how that directly impacts the streamside landowners and the irrigators, and improves fish health, stream health. Now I'd like to bring in Merrill, who's been making really thoughtful changes on his own ranch, and been involved in thoughtful approaches across Idaho to improve both operational outcomes and ecosystem health. You've been involved in salmon recovery and conservation for years, Merrill. From your perspective as both a rancher and a former policymaker, what does successful irrigation modernization or stream restoration look like for people who depend on the land and water and the fish?
So good question. So maybe just a little bit of history on our part of the world. So our ranch is located right at the headwaters of the Lemhi River, and that's part of the Salmon River. And so we have salmon and steelhead that migrate almost somewhere between 800 and 900 miles inland to spawn here in the Lemhi River. And that's always been an important asset for our community. So when we start talking about irrigation projects that are going to be successful, what are the things that we need to make them actually work? And as we began to explore this concept, we came up with kind of maybe a different thought process. And what we thought was, let's require charitable intent if we're going to do a project. And what does that mean? So the very first thing is, if we're going to do some kind of a project, it cannot have a negative impact on the agricultural community, which is the basis of our economy. The second thing is, it would have to have a positive impact upon the natural resource. That would be whether it's a stream health or whatever. And then the third thing was to make sure it benefited the community. And so as we began to look at doing projects and maybe restoration work, I remember the very first project that we started. It was the attempt to begin to reconnect a tributary to the Lemhi. And for most of the irrigation season, many of the tributaries to the Lemhi were disconnected from the Lemhi itself. And we had kind of the senior water rights on a creek called Canyon Creek. And so we brought that water down the ditch, and we had made improvements on irrigation efficiency, and we always had extra water. And we thought it would be best if we could find a way to make sure that water remains in the stream and actually creates the opportunity to reconnect that tributary to the Lemhi. And so we started that project, and we began to work with, a variety of folks, Fish and Game, other entities. And as was mentioned before, one of the very most important things is to build that trust. And without that trust, very little work gets done. And so we began to work on it. And I remember one of the things, we went through all those processes, and then we came to the question. They said, well, okay, we have a contract, go find a contractor. And then pick the contractor. So I remember there were 3 contractors that entered a bid on this project. The most expensive one was from Blackfoot, Idaho. The least expensive one was from Idaho Falls. And the third one was from a local person, maybe the only backhoe at that time we had in the valley. And that was when the choice was made. Let's build our local community. And so we chose that local contractor, and the project went forward and was a success. And so we kind of set those 3 parameters for moving projects forward, which has been good for agriculture. It's been good for the ecosystem, and it's been good for our local community. And I think that's where we built the trust.
Excellent. Yeah. Those are 3 principles that to govern projects that are really key to making good projects and to building that trust. So it's great to hear and a powerful way to frame what success would really looks like. Balancing the needs of working lands with the health of river systems is really important. I'd like to shift back to Jeff. Explore the importance of collaboration from your perspective in getting these kinds of projects off the ground. And you've emphasized collaboration throughout your career, from your early work with on the North Fork of the Gunnison to your ongoing role in basin-wide planning. What makes for a truly successful partnership between engineers, landowners, and agencies when it comes to fish-friendly irrigation projects?
I think that in order to make a real successful collaboration, you need to look at all of the issues involved. You know, this particular webinar is about food and fish and irrigating and keeping agriculture, sustainable. So you've got to look at the landowners. You've got to be able to develop trust with the landowners. Of course, the landowners are not the ones with substantial amount of funding. So you've got to, you're generally bringing in government agencies who have different, oftentimes wanting to develop fish passage structures or improve the native environment, aquatic environment. And then, of course, like Merrill was just mentioning, local contractors, I think, are a real big plus in developing the collaboration. They know the area. I mean, you could bring in, and then oftentimes you're bringing in contractors who have more experience and have done this 100 times and things like that, but they don't know the watershed like the locals do. So for me, what I found was that most of the stakeholders involved in a project, they, you know, they don't necessarily know everybody that's in the collaboration, and you need to develop that kind of trust as well. So, you know, getting the landowners together and saying, "Oh, we're going to get $100,000 from the EPA or the Bureau of Reclamation or something like that," and you know, the hackles go up, and oh, really? Are they going to shut us down? Are they going to do this? You know, or that we don't want them to know what's going on and here and that kind of thing. Well, you know, those kinds of fears I understand are you know, relevant, but that's how you develop a real collaboration, is you understand what everybody is trying to accomplish, and being able to get a healthy river aquatic environmental system and get a full decree of reliable irrigation water into your ditch are very doable. They're very doable projects. You can do that. The engineering part, like I mentioned earlier, is the easier part. It's really developing that kind of relationship between the different parties involved.
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it sounds like listening, making sure that you're allowing people to voice their concerns and be heard as part of that is such a critical piece. And like you said, I think it's important to remember that often the barriers are social or political or policy rather than technical or knowing what to do on the ground. So to come back to you, Merrill, I think maybe we'd love to hear your perspective from the landowner side on collaboration, especially when there's a range of viewpoints at the table, and how that how what Jeff just said resonates with you as somebody who's operating a ditch and managing an agricultural operation.
So it's interesting that Jeff and I have never met. We live a great distance apart, but our thoughts are really similar. And I suspect that points to the importance of building relationships. So I might take a little journey back in history. And I can remember the time when a rancher would say, you know, if I've been out on the range and I've seen the forest ranger 3 times and he's only seen me once, it's been a good year. And then I might mention another one. So when we first started working with the thought process of maybe working together, I remember Tom Curette, who works for the Fish and Game. We became really good friends. And I remember the first day he came into our driveway in his pickup. It was in July, and we were beginning to hay, and I had the swather in the driveway, and I was under the swather. And I remember looking out from under the swather and seeing this Fish and Game pickup pull into our driveway. And the first thought that came to me, I don't think I've done anything illegal today.
today.
And so, as time went on, you know, those relationships were built. And we began to look at what we wanted to do on the Lemhi River to improve grazing management. And so, for the most part, there were just fences that went across the river, down the river. And everywhere there's a fence, there's going to be a cattle crossing on both sides of the fence. And so we started talking about that. Well, what can we do? And we finally looked at it and said, how do we want to measure or manage this river? What do we want this to look like? And so we thought, let's change the direction of the fence. Let's turn them 90 degrees. Let's fence parallel. Let's fence similar types of systems so that we can use them at the appropriate times that benefits not only agriculture, but benefits the river itself. Well, nothing had been done like that. And as was mentioned before, you got to have money to do something like that. So what we did is we began to talk to the Forest Service, and we began to talk to the BLM, and we actually included the Shoshone-Bannock tribe. And right at first, why, you know, the BLM said, we can't do this on a weekday. And the Forest Service said the same thing. And so the only day that we could come out and begin to change the fences was on a weekend. And the Shoshone-Bannock, who have a cultural connection and historic connection with the salmon and steelhead and Lemhi, they provided the funding to put the fences up. And so here we were on a weekend, and our ranch is right next to Ledor. That's a little community. And we had the Forest Service, Fish and Game, Bureau of Land Management, and the show band, all there with their trucks. And I remember we worked on it all day long, and I got home, and all of a sudden my phone started to ring. And the question that I got was, are you in trouble, and are you going to jail? And so it takes time to build that trust. And if I might, I don't know if we got time, but maybe one more deal. So once you build the trust, then you can begin to get work done. So we had a fire that burned a huge amount of our rangeland, and we were getting ready to move forward. And I remember meeting with the Forest Service and BLM, and I remember asking the question, what if we had a magic wand and we could do anything we wanted? What would we do on the range? And it was like, yeah, we can't do that. And so we talked a little bit. And I remember coming back to one meeting, and the forest ranger, who was Dennis Hilliard, he said, you know, I'm going to retire this fall. And the range conservationist for the Forest Service said, so am I. And it was the same with the Bureau of Land Management. And so as they talked about it, they said, well, what are they going to do to us if we do this? Make us retire 2 weeks early? And so we began to put a range management project together that has lasted, 20 some years now. And yeah, work takes trust, and trust takes time. And the more trust you have, the less time it takes to get the work done.
Amen.
Thanks, Merrill. Appreciate the perspective. Really underscores how important it is to take a deep breath when you're under your swather and not run and hide, I guess, when the truck pulls up. So much of it is just patience with each other and recognizing that there's, you probably, if you're from the Fish and Game, that's the response you might get when you get there. That doesn't mean you should quit following up. So I think that we've talked about the engineering issues, or the lack, and the importance of collaboration. And I wanted to get back to Jeff to ask a little bit about the financial side and maybe some of the regulatory side of these projects, because a few of the questions that have come up in the Q&A already are related to challenges with permitting. And I know that probably gets back again to trust with agencies and things like that. But both what makes a project fundable, and then what are you thinking about when you're thinking about making sure that it complies with water rights and regulations?
Well, it's kind of a loaded question. The permitting side of this really is difficult. It could take as much money or more to do the permitting, and as much, and probably more time, substantially more time to do the permitting than it does to build the project, or to engineer it, or to build the trust, or pretty much anything else. It's the permitting side of things is quite difficult, but oftentimes, if you're going to build a collaboration with a federal government, then you've got to go through NEPA, and you've got to check those boxes. And so you have to hire a consultant who's an expert at that, because it's very complicated, and you don't exactly know how to check those boxes. So in the end, it takes money. It takes more money. But oftentimes you could build those kinds of partnerships with the BLM, with the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, with the states. In our state, it's the Colorado Water Conservation Board. And you throw that into the budget. That just becomes part of the budget. It does expand what it costs to do it, but it builds a collaboration that's really efficient. Maybe efficient's not the right word, but it certainly builds a collaboration that is effective. And in the end, you end up with a really good project. If you're building something that like Merrill said, that you would thought would have got you into trouble a while back, you can get past all that stuff, and develop this collaboration that works. Here in Colorado, I don't know about the other states, but we have a process called the roundtables, and our state is divided up into 9 different major watersheds, and within those watersheds, you have a panel of stakeholders, and those stakeholders come from landowners, they come from agencies, they come from environmental activists, and recreationalists and things like that, and they all get together to develop projects. Projects come to them, and then they say, they look at it and they say, well, can you do this that would help the environment? Or what can you do to help this landowner get a more conserve water on their ranch? So that process has worked out really well in Colorado. And the Colorado Water Conservation Board has a fair amount of funding for this kind of thing. That obviously includes permitting. You've got to go down the permitting road. And so it looks at all the different aspects of a particular project. You know, endangered species and putting more water in the river, and at the same time keeping a full decree of water going into a ditch for agriculture. All very important. So, did that answer your question, Lou?
Like you said, it's a tough one. I think you did a good job of approaching it. I think there's some things that come up in the chat that are awfully specific about or in the Q&A that are awfully specific about particular water rights or permitting issues. It's going to be really challenging to get to those things specifically. So I think as an overview of how to approach that stuff, that was excellent. Thanks, Jeff. And Merrill, you've got experience, doing these projects on your own place with your own set of circumstances, water rights, Idaho regulations, federal nexus stuff with the BLM nearby and all of that. Can you tell us a little bit about, you've already mentioned some of the kind of specific changes you made to organizing or orienting fences and some of the other stuff. I'd love to hear about specifically in irrigation system modification projects, or walk us through some of those specific changes you've made and how they support both your operation and healthy ecosystems.
Okay. So I'm going to start with one that was the very first one we did. And you definitely have to have, the capacity to do it. And that's going to involve a lot of different folks. And so the one that we did is we had a ditch that ran, I don't know, maybe a couple miles to a field. And so when we would irrigate, the water was used for irrigation. But then when we got ready to hay, or, we were turning off hand lines or pivots or whatever, that water just went down this gully and it just washed down. And we thought, how can we fix that? And we thought and thought, and finally we thought, what if we do what we were going to call a closed system? And so rather than having an irrigation ditch, we went right to the stream itself. We put in the structures. Is that okay? Anyway, we put in the structure right there at the creek. And so whenever we shut down a pivot, that water was immediately in stream. Whenever we stopped to hay, all that water was in the stream, and it created connectivity. That was just the first part of it, but that was only partial connectivity. And what we were looking at is how could we connect various tributaries to the Lemhi to create connectivity for fish and for all the benefits that come with connected streams. So what we did in Idaho is we created through the water board what is called a water transaction program. And so we began to look at the tributaries and water rights and looking for those senior water rights that were closest to the mouth of tributaries. And then we worked with the Idaho Department of Water Resources so we could release those senior water rights to the river, which created a connected system. And then that water was pumped back for irrigation. What that did is it put cooler water into the river, took that warmer water out of the river for irrigation. And that required a lot of different partners, whether you're talking Idaho Power or whatever. But by creating a working partnership, and what we did there was we have what we call the Office of Species Conservation. And that brings everybody together, all those different folks that are necessary to get the permitting in place and those kind of things so that we can accomplish it. It would be impossible for a landowner to do anything like that. It requires a huge lift from a lot of different folks with a lot of different expertise to get a project done. But those have been done up and down. One of the other things that was done on the Lemhi River is all irrigation diversions are screened because we have migrating fish. So when those fish get ready to migrate downstream, they only have a certain period of time to migrate from our part of the world to the Pacific Ocean. And if those get entrapped and move down an irrigation ditch and then have to swim back up and migrate down, and just not going to be really successful. So every diversion on the Lemhi is screened. And part of that screening process was that every landowner, for a whopping compensation of $1, provided easement access to it so they could build roads to those diversions to maintain and all those things. It's been really pretty successful.
Who maintains the screens? Who
Okay,
uses this?
so the Idaho Department of Fish and Game has taken responsibility to maintain those screens. So that takes the onus off the landowner to do that. And you know, if we look back, and I really want to be careful on this because I think we have to not try to take too much credit. But if we were to look back in the mid-1990s, this is what we called the dark days or the sad days, when it looked as if we were going to lose our salmon and steelhead runs forever. And when you think about this particular run, it's the furthest inland run of anadromous fish to the highest elevations any place in the world. And to lose that would be a significant human loss. And we're not out of the woods, but we do have salmon and steelhead that return every year.
That's awesome. Thank you. Thanks for the context there. And I think in the chat, I see that Tom Page, who's a board member of WLA, I would be remiss to say, and a neighbor of yours just over the hill, I think, mentions that a lot of the projects in the Upper Salmon Basin are funded by ESA fish dollars under the Columbia Hydro System Act. And so there's maybe more resources there because of the salmon and the than in some other basins. And I think, you know, Jeff was talking about fundability, Colorado's mechanisms for funding, and the basin roundtables. Lots of different ways that this gets done, and where the money is coming from, and certainly, like you say, a national world treasure of a thing to protect, and the investment has been made since that act. And glad to have you on to tell us about it. I think one last question for Jeff, and then we'll get to anything that's left in the Q&A that I haven't sort of tried to interject, and see what else comes in. Please, if you have questions, drop them in there. As someone, Jeff, deeply engaged in both on-the-ground projects and the statewide water planning in Colorado, how does irrigation infrastructure modernization and the stream restoration irrigating for food and fish, how does that play into the the state of Colorado's long-term water security? And then, you know, the Gunnison is in the Colorado River Basin function. You know, ultimately that water is this giant 7-state system that's in various states of crisis, depending on, you know, which how the snow year has been. And so how does it contribute to that, to long-term water security for the Southwest, sort of more broadly too? If you wanted to touch on that, you're welcome to stay in Colorado if that feels more comfortable. You're muted, Jeff.
There, how's that? Okay. Yeah, no, I'm happy to speak about that. I mean, I think that there's a lot of reason to be optimistic that we could make some real improvements throughout all of the different watersheds. There's a particular project that I've been working on that relies a lot on modernization of these ditches. And the I think that in a lot of ditches in Colorado, and I know in some other states, you divert a lot, you divert all of the water. Certainly in Colorado, there's a law that says you can't make a call on the river unless you divert the whole river. So in order to deal with that, that's been a real challenge for engineers and for irrigators for quite a while. But what's really exciting about this whole thing is the fact that there is now technology out there with telemetry and automated gates and that kind of thing that will allow you to divert water and still maintain your water rights. And in return, what you don't have a decree to, additional water back to the river at the point of diversion, instead of a quarter mile downstream, what has generally been the case. The water goes down the ditch and then they measure it after it, you get a little more equalization in the ditch. They measure it, and what's above and beyond the water right goes back to the river, but that disconnects a quarter mile of the river or so. Now there is technology out there, and it works pretty well, that it will measure water in real time there at the diversion point and operate the head gate and turnout gates and just a variety of different types of returns back to the river, and do it right there at the diversion point, so that you're not losing the ecosystem of that particular river for however long it is. And in my particular example, it's a quarter mile. It also allows you to build a diversion structure with a long run out that will create fish passage, because now you've got a little more water in the river, and it doesn't impact water rights, and it keeps, and fish are able to migrate up to areas that they haven't been able to reach in many years. Merrill was talking about that with steelhead and salmon. Here in our watershed, it happens to be different other types of native fish, chubs and pike minnows and that kind of thing. But they're now able to get up into areas of the watershed that they haven't been able to get up to for 100 years. So that's a big benefit. You take that kind of benefit and you spread it out throughout all of the Colorado River Basin through the 7 Colorado Basin states, and you've got some serious conservation going on. I hope we can continue to be able to do these kinds of projects. I'm a little worried about the financing right now. A lot of our funding in the past has come from the Bureau of Reclamation for the Colorado River Basin, and then matched with funds from state agencies. In our case, the Colorado Water Conservation Board, and then some foundations and things like that. But federal funding is drying up, and I think that we could be in a lot of trouble in the next few years. So I think we just have to cross our fingers and hope for the best.
Thank you, Jeff. And I think we've got, so we're right at 12:51, and that's exciting because we intend to always try to leave 10 minutes for the Q&A. There are some questions coming in the chat, which I am taking a look at, and I will so I will direct a couple of questions here, and then please, if you have other questions, don't hesitate to drop them in the Q&A. And like I said, if we don't get to them today, I'll try to make sure that we get answers from Merrill, Jeff, or someone on WLA's team who has some insight into what you're asking. One question comes up from Linda to Merrill. You mentioned that the legacy project with the folks who are retiring, and it prompted in her thought, like, how do we make it safer for people who are in mid-career to or in other situations or work for other organizations to collaborate on innovative projects? Like, what are some tips for helping make some of this feel a little bit more safe to fail or safe to try for folks?
And I think that's a really important question, because when we look at doing things, there's always a risk of failure. And sometimes that prevents us from actually trying to move forward. I remember one of my teachers, this is a long, long time ago, in a class, and he told me this bit of advice. He said, if you do not give yourself permission to question, you will never experience the thrill of discovery. And I think there has to be room for innovation, for people to be able to question practices. There's one is simply the use of water. When we start talking about the efficient use of water, how to use it efficiently. And I've been working on it since 2009. Next year, we are going to try a different way of using water more efficiently. And it's only taken that many years. But I do think there has to be, and I remember, that was an anomaly. But I do think we need to find a way that gives people the opportunity to explore. And so as a rancher, at the end of the year, we don't go out and say, gee, where was the tallest piece of grass that we grew on the place? Basically, at the end of the year, we come back and we say, what didn't work very well? What do we need to do to make that work better? And I think that same permission needs to be given to all agencies and folks working in an agency. The opportunity to explore, the opportunity to question, and so we can have the discovery that we need.
Thank you, Merrill. That's really thoughtful response. And I saw Jeff nodding. I don't know if there's anything you want to add about your experience with trial and error in this space, or with it as a process that emerges in collaboration, helping people get comfortable with the fact that there are unknowns and that we all are on a learning journey together.
Well, I completely agree with Merrill's sentiment there, that we do need to work on discovery you know, when I first started doing the North Fork River Improvement Association, we were building bank stabilization structures, using rock, using live material, things like that. And we would occasionally get failures, you know. That's what learning is all about. I've often ran across projects from different agencies, NRCS, BOR, that most landowners would say are way overbuilt. And they're overbuilt primarily because the engineers who design them are afraid to fail. If they fail, they're going to lose their job, you know, or they have the potential of losing their job. Or it's certainly not going to look good in their record. But I think that you've got to be able to do that. You've got to be able to try something new, like planting willows along the banks of the river, or you know, or something along those lines. Okay, so some of them get washed away, or your rocks move on a particular structure that you've put in, or you've tried a root wad revetment of some sort, and it doesn't exactly work out the way you want. You've got to be able to do that. I remember on one of my first projects, I put in a variety of structures, and really the design was to allow the river to find its equilibrium. But a particular agency came in and did an assessment of it and said, oh, well, it moved here and it moved there, and so we consider it a failure. But in the end, that was what we were trying to do, is we were trying to get the river to find its own equilibrium, and that's exactly what it did. So Merrill's 100% right.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, really good to I think one thing that we know all the time, we hear from people all the time, is that people are often too afraid, too often too afraid to share the times that it didn't work. And that we often learn best actually from asking that question that Merrill says that ranchers ask themselves every year: what didn't work this year? And if we do that together in these collaborations, we can learn even more from each other. So I appreciate you sharing one time that it didn't work, Jeff. And we're running right up on time here. I think Brad mentioned, and there's some stuff in the chat that he'd like to connect. He'd also like us to be to remind us that to think sort of beyond the banks. And I wonder if you know, you wanted to touch on that, Merrill, a little bit about how this work extends beyond the banks of the river and into the uplands and the forests around your place. You're muted. You're muted, Merrill.
Okay, so I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to Native Americans and the way they looked at things. They looked at things from ridgeline to ridgeline. And if our only concentration is right on the bank of a stream and we're looking like 15 feet away from it, we are that's like looking through the eye of a needle at something 2 feet away and thinking we know what's going on. We don't. You have to look at the entire thing. What's the impact on the wildlife, you know, movement, all those things. They all have to work and function together. And so that's really important. So when we did the reconnects, basically that was to reconnect the very, you know, beginning of the streams to back to the Lemhi, and then to the salmon, and then on down to the Pacific Ocean. So when we look at a connected landscape, we have to look not only width, but we have to look generationally. That's 7 generations, 140 years. That's what we got to look at.
Thank you, Merrill. That's an excellent way to close. just really honored to have been in conversation with both of you today for your expertise. Thank you very much for sharing so much wisdom with our audience. I want to say a big thank you to Jeff and Merrill. Thanks to all of you for attending the webinar today. We hope you'll join us next month. We are going to get a little further away from the stream bank, which is exciting. Maybe not quite 7 generations away, although who knows? I'm sure that the wisdom of our panelists at the next webinar will take us in interesting places I can't predict right now. But that webinar will be on the connection between soil health and stream health. So a critical way of looking at that topic. And as a reminder, we will send out a recording and a recap of this webinar next week. Thank you to Matt for putting together that recap, and to all of you for helping share that with people who would benefit from the wisdom we all just experienced. And then finally, I'd like to thank the Walton Family Foundation, Conscience Bay Research, and all of our funding and program partners for supporting our water program, and for all of the members of WLA for supporting the work we do and our mission. Please, if you enjoy the content we put together and want to support it, we do love when members become donors. So take a look at that possibility there on the screen. And finally, thanks again to Merrill and Jeff, and thank you all for joining us today. Have a great rest of your week, and happy Easter weekend.